early in the evening. The city was settling into that strange quiet that appears for a moment before the night becomes loud again. Cars rolled by in slow lines, the office towers glowed with cold white lights, and people hurried across the sidewalks, carrying bags, coffees, or just the weight of another long day. Right in the middle of that busy place stood a tall building with reflective glass walls. The kind of building that instantly told everyone that only important people walked through its doors. And inside that building, on the highest floor, a billionaire was stepping out of a long meeting that had drained every drop of patience. He had left. He wasn't the kind of man who enjoyed being called a billionaire. He believed it attracted people who only wanted something from him. But the truth was, he had earned that title. He built several companies, ran them with strict discipline, spent years sleeping in his office when he was younger, and eventually reached a point where money flowed into his life faster than he had time to count it. People respected him, some feared him, and many avoided him because he always looked too serious to approach. His expensive suit, sharp expression, and habit of walking fast made most people move aside when he passed. That day, he walked out of the meeting room rubbing his eyes. His assistant tried to talk to him about the next day's schedule, but he lifted a hand gently, signaling he needed silence. He was tired, not the kind of tired that goes away after a nap, but the kind that sits deep inside a person. He felt it every day now. It was the feeling of running after something but not knowing what it was anymore. The elevator doors closed around him. And for a moment he let the quiet envelop him. He didn't scroll through emails. He didn't look at his phone. He just stood there breathing, like someone trying to remember how to relax. When the elevator reached the lobby, the sound of voices, footsteps, and the soft classical music playing in the background greeted him. The guards nodded respectfully. A few employees lowered their heads quickly as he passed. He didn't notice any of it. His mind was far away, crowded with responsibilities he wished he could escape for even a few hours. Outside the building, his car waited near the steps, the driver already standing beside the door, ready to open it. But before he reached the car, something made him slow down. It wasn't a loud noise or someone calling his name. It was a small girl sitting on the steps, not blocking the way, not begging loudly, not drawing attention. She sat quietly with her knees pulled close, holding a thin, worn-out notebook against her chest as if it was something precious. Her hair was tied back in a rough ponytail, and her clothes were slightly dusty, the kind that showed she hadn't had an easy day, or an easy life. He saw her only for a second before his eyes moved forward again. Children sitting outside buildings wasn't something new in the city. Sometimes they sold flowers, tissues, or handmade bracelets. Sometimes they asked for coins. Sometimes they just sat there silently. Most people walked past them without thinking much, and he had become one of those people someone who had grown used to seeing. Sadness without letting it touch him. But the girl looked up at the sound of footsteps. Not toward him specifically, just toward the general movement of people passing by. She had that hopeful look children get when they're waiting for something good to happen, even though it rarely does. Her eyes followed each person for a moment, then quietly returned to the ground. He didn't stop to watch. He kept walking, letting his mind drift back to business matters. When he reached the car, the driver opened the door for him. He placed one foot inside, already thinking about the emails he needed to respond to. He wanted to reach home, take off his tie, maybe sit in silence for a while before preparing for the next day. His life had become nothing but movement, deadlines, and decisions. There was no space for distractions. But just as he lowered himself into the car, a soft voice rose from behind him, not loud, not demanding, just a gentle attempt at being heard. "Excuse me, sir. Do you maybe have something left over to eat?" He didn't turn around immediately. He closed his eyes for a brief second, as if the question had touched a place inside him he wasn't prepared to revisit. The driver looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to close the door or wait. A few people walking on the sidewalk heard the girl's voice, but didn't look her way. It was just another moment in the city. Nothing unusual. He finally turned his head slightly and saw her standing a few steps away, holding the notebook tighter than before. She wasn't aggressive. She didn't move closer. She looked as if she expected him to ignore her like everyone else. Maybe she was already preparing to sit back down. Something about her expression made him hesitate. Not annoyance, but a strange familiarity he couldn't explain. He took a breath and forced himself back into the persona he wore every day. Busy. Distant. Unavailable. "I don't have anything with me," he said simply. His voice steady but colder than he intended. She nodded instantly. Not disappointed, just used to such answers. She took a step back, ready to return to her place on the steps. He could have let the driver close the door. He could have left without another thought. That was what he normally did. But before he could give the signal to leave, the girl glanced up again, this time directly at him, and asked a question he never expected from someone her age. "Sir, do you think someone like me can ever be important in this world?" The driver blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. The few people walking past slowed down unconsciously, sensing something different in her tone. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't sound angry or hopeless. She sounded curious. It's like she was asking a question she had carried inside her for a long time. The billionaire felt his heart thump once, hard enough that it surprised him. Of all the things she could have asked, food, money, help, she chose that? He stared at her, unable to speak immediately. The question didn't belong to a hungry child sitting on cold steps. It belonged to someone searching for meaning. Someone trying to understand their place in a world that rarely showed kindness. He slowly stepped out of the car again. The driver straightened up, confused. The people who had paused started whispering. He ignored all of them. His attention remained on the girl who stood with hope in her eyes, and a question that stirred a memory he thought he had buried years ago. He walked one step closer to her, not fully sure why. Something in her tone, gentle, honest, brought back an old scene from his childhood. A moment he rarely allowed himself to think about. Back then, he had been a small boy living in a cramped house with peeling paint, broken windows, and long nights where the lights went out without warning. He remembered asking someone a similar question, someone he loved more than anything. And he remembered the answer he received, an answer that shaped his belief about life. But somewhere along the way, he lost that belief. Work had replaced it. Money had replaced it. Stress had buried it. And now a small girl's voice had dug it up again without even trying. He cleared his throat, still not ready to address her question. Instead, he asked something else. "What's your name?" She hesitated for just a moment, then answered softly, "My name is Lila." He nodded. It suited her, simple, gentle, hopeful. He gestured toward the steps. "Why are you sitting here so late?" She looked down at her notebook before answering. "Because it's quieter here. I try to read when the noise outside my home gets too loud. Sometimes the electricity doesn't work. And I get hungry, so I come here hoping someone might share something small." Her voice wasn't filled with sadness. It was matter of fact. It's like she had accepted this routine as part of life. He looked at the notebook she held so tightly. "You study here?" She nodded again. "I just try to finish my homework. The lights in this area are brighter, and people walking by. I don't know. It feels safer." He didn't know what to say. He had grown up in a place where studying outside wasn't a choice, it was a struggle. But he had escaped that world long ago. He had forgotten what it felt like to make do with nothing. His driver cleared his throat gently, reminding him of schedules and responsibilities. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't care. The billionaire looked at her again, feeling something shift inside him, something quiet but strong. Something he hadn't felt since he was her age. She stood there waiting, still unsure whether he would answer her question about being important. He wasn't ready to answer it yet. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because her question deserved more than a quick reply spoken out of obligation. It deserved honesty. And honesty required him to face a part of himself he had ignored for years. He took a slow breath and said, "Are you hungry now?" She hesitated, but eventually whispered, "Yes." Without thinking, he gestured for her to follow him to the car. The driver's eyes widened, but he didn't speak. When the girl stepped closer, the billionaire opened the door himself, instead of letting the driver do it. "Come," he said gently. Let's get you something to eat. She blinked in surprise, almost afraid to accept. But when she finally stepped inside, she held her notebook on her lap like it was a shield and a comfort all at once. The billionaire sat beside her, giving her space. But his mind raced with questions he never expected to ask himself. As the car began to move, the city lights passing by like blurred stars, he realized something unsettling. Her one simple question had shaken him more deeply than any business problem ever had, and he didn't yet understand why. The car moved gently through the evening traffic, and for a while, neither of them spoke. The city lights reflected softly on the windows, leaving streaks of color across the glass. Inside the car, there was a quiet that felt different from silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet people share when they are both thinking too much, unsure where to start. The billionaire looked over at the small girl sitting beside him. She sat very still, her hands clasped tightly around her notebook as if she feared it might be taken away. She didn't lean back on the soft seat. She didn't touch the buttons or look around with curiosity like most children would in a luxury car. She sat straight, careful, almost too careful, like someone who didn't want to disturb anything around her. He softened his voice. "You can relax, you know. It's okay." She nodded politely, but didn't move an inch. Her eyes stayed fixed on the notebook. He tried again. "You like studying?" She looked up for a second, then down again. "I try. I'm not very good at it sometimes, but I try." There was something in the way she said. It's simple, honest, without trying to impress anyone. Most people he met in business pretended to know more than they did. This little girl sitting quietly in his car told the truth without hesitation. "What do you like to study the most?" He asked. "Stories," she said softly. "When I read stories, I don't feel so small." He understood the feeling more than she could imagine. When he was young, stories were his escape too. His mother used to read to him late at night when the lights flickered, or the house felt too quiet. She would tell him that books could stretch the world and make even the smallest person feel big. The memory hit him unexpectedly. He turned his face toward the window, pretending to look outside, but really trying to hide the sudden heaviness in his eyes. The driver asked respectfully, "Sir, where would you like to go?" He hesitated for a moment. He hadn't thought that far. He only knew she needed food, and he didn't want to take her anywhere too crowded. People might stare. She might feel uncomfortable. After a few seconds, he answered, "Stop at the small restaurant near the lake. The quiet one." The driver nodded, and the car changed direction. The girl looked up at him again, this time braver. "Sir, I hope this isn't too much trouble for you." He blinked. "Why would it be trouble?" She shrugged gently. "Because people like you are very busy, and people like me. We don't usually sit in cars like this." He felt the words land somewhere deep inside him. He had heard phrases like that before, from employees, from strangers, from the media. But hearing them from a child made them heavier. It reminded him of what power and distance looked like from the outside. "You don't have to think that way," he told her quietly. "Then how should I think?" she asked. He paused. Her question wasn't rude. It wasn't bold. It was simply curious, like she genuinely wanted to know how to see the world differently. He gave a small smile, one he hadn't shown in a long time. "Maybe think of me as just a person. Someone who wants to help you tonight." She studied his face for a moment longer than most children would dare. Then she gave a tiny nod and whispered, "Okay." The car continued through the city until it reached a quieter area near the lake. Small lights glowed along the water, making the dark surface shimmer. The restaurant stood at the corner, warm lights glowing through its windows. It wasn't fancy, but it wasn't cheap either. It was the kind of place people visited when they wanted peace. When the car stopped, the driver quickly stepped out to open the door. But before he could, the billionaire opened his own door and then opened hers. Wanting her to feel safe, not intimidated, she stepped out slowly. Her shoes made a soft sound on the pavement. She looked around like someone seeing a new world, admiring it but afraid to touch it. He gently guided her toward the entrance. Inside, the warm smell of fresh food filled the air. The restaurant wasn't busy. A few families sat at tables, talking quietly. A couple in the corner laughed gently over a shared dessert. The soft hum of conversation made the place feel alive, but calm. A waiter approached them politely. "Good evening, sir." "Evening," he replied. "A table for two. Somewhere quiet." The waiter noticed the girl but didn't ask questions. He led them to a table by the window overlooking the lake. The billionaire let the girl sit first, noticing again how carefully she moved. As if she didn't want to leave marks on the chair. He handed her the menu, though he doubted she had ever seen such a menu before. The list of dishes, the choices, the prices, any of it could overwhelm a child who was just looking for something simple to eat. She held the menu with both hands and looked at each line slowly, her lips moving slightly as she read. After almost a minute, she lowered it and asked, "Sir, what should I pick?" "Anything you want." After another long moment, she said softly, "Maybe soup and bread." He felt a gentle ache in his chest. Soup and bread. The simplest meal. The least demanding. She didn't want to seem greedy. She didn't want to trouble anyone. She didn't even choose a main dish. "You can pick more than that," he said kindly. She shook her head. "Soup is already more than I hoped." "Oh," he didn't push her. "Soup it is." The waiter came back, and he ordered a warm vegetable soup for her, a full meal for himself, and extra dishes just in case she feels a little hungrier later, though he didn't say that part aloud. When the waiter left, the girl placed her notebook on the table slowly, as if she was finally letting her guard down. He noticed the cover was bent and faded, the edges worn from being opened too many times. "Do you write in it?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Sometimes. I write about things I see, or things I want to remember, or things I don't want to forget." He leaned forward slightly. "What kind of things?" She hesitated before answering. "Mostly small things, like when the sky looks pink, or when my teacher smiles at me, or when someone gives me extra bread, or when I read a story that makes me feel brave." He listened carefully. Her words were simple, but carried a truth that people often forgot when they became adults. The small things mattered the most. He asked softly, "Do you write about bad things too?" She looked down at her hands. "Only when I feel too full inside, but I don't like writing them. They make the pages feel heavy." The billionaire understood exactly what she meant. He had spent years filling his days with heavy things, deadlines, pressure, expectations. But he never wrote any of it down. He just carried it. A waiter brought her soup, steaming gently in a white bowl. The smell made her eyes widen just a little, but she waited politely for the billionaire to begin eating. When he nodded that she could start, she lifted the spoon with both hands and tasted it slowly, as if each sip was something precious. Watching her eat stirred something in him, a mix of guilt, protectiveness, and sadness. She didn't rush. She didn't slurp. She didn't eat like someone starving. She ate like someone grateful. Deeply, quietly grateful. He felt the need to speak, though he didn't know why. "About your question earlier," he said gently. She paused, the spoon halfway to her lips. "Which one? The one you asked before you got into the car?" She blinked, remembering. "Oh," he continued carefully. "Why did you ask if someone like you can ever be important?" She stirred the soup slowly. "Because sometimes I feel invisible. People walk past. They don't look. They don't hear. I know they're busy. I know they have their own lives. But sometimes I wonder if I will stay like this forever small." Her voice was steady, not self-pitying. She wasn't complaining. She was asking a real question about her place in the world. He leaned back in his chair and studied her face, the quiet bravery in her eyes, the soft determination hidden under layers of hardship. She reminded him of himself at her age, before money changed his life. Back then, he used to wonder if he would ever matter, if the world would ever see him. His throat tightened slightly. He spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. "You're not small. Not even close." She looked up at him in surprise. "Then what am I?" "You," he said, "are someone the world hasn't noticed yet." Her eyes widened a little. The idea seemed new to her, a thought she had never considered before. He continued. Being noticed isn't the same as being important. Importance comes from what you do, how you think, what you dream. And from what I've seen so far, you have more strength than many grown people I know. She stared at him quietly, trying to understand whether to believe him. But sir, she whispered, how can someone like me change anything? He smiled softly. Sometimes the smallest questions change the biggest lives. She didn't understand the deeper meaning yet, but she nodded slowly, as if accepting his words. The rest of the meal passed warmly. She relaxed more, even letting her shoulders drop. She asked small questions about the lake, about his work, about why the tables had candles. He answered simply, avoiding anything that would overwhelm her. When they finished eating, she held her notebook again, tracing the edges without opening it. He watched her for a moment and then asked Leela, "Can I walk you home?" She looked surprised. "You want to see where I live?" "Yes." Her expression softened into something like relief. "Okay, but it's not far, and it's not very nice." He shook his head gently. "That's fine." She stood up slowly, and he followed her out of the restaurant. The night air was cooler now. The lake shimmered quietly under the moonlight. She walked with small steps, and he walked beside her, adjusting his pace naturally. As they turned down a narrow street, the lights grew dimmer. The buildings changed from polished glass to old bricks. The sidewalks were uneven. The sounds of traffic faded, replaced by the distant noise of people talking, music playing, and a generator humming somewhere. She led him past tiny shops, broken fences, and narrow alleys. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was walking into a world he had once known but left behind, a world he had forgotten, and with each step, her earlier question echoed louder in his mind. "Do you think someone like me can ever be important in this world?" Little did he know. Her question had already changed something inside him, something he couldn't ignore anymore. And the night was far from over. They walked slowly through the narrow streets, and each step seemed to pull the billionaire deeper into a world he had been away from for years. The streetlights here were not bright. Some flickered. Some were broken entirely. The pavement was uneven, cracked in places, patched in others. But none of that bothered Lila. She walked with a certain familiarity, as if every shadow and corner had a memory she already understood. He stayed close beside her, occasionally glancing at her small figure as she walked with her notebook pressed to her chest again. It was nearly dark now, and he could see how carefully she guided her steps, avoiding puddles and broken tiles. She wasn't nervous, only cautious, like someone who had learned to move through life gently, so she wouldn't disturb anything around her. "Are we almost there?" he asked softly, not wanting to overwhelm her. She nodded. "Just a little more." He noticed how her voice always softened when she spoke about her home. Not embarrassed, just quiet, as if she had accepted the life she lived, even if it wasn't easy. They passed a small shop with dim lights. A woman inside waved kindly at Lila. Lila smiled shyly and waved back. "You know the people here?" he asked. She nodded again. "Some of them. They're nice. They look out for each other when they can." The billionaire took in the sight around him. It wasn't a dangerous area, not tonight at least. But it was visibly worn down by time-old balconies, cracked windows, walls stained from years of rain and dust. But he also noticed something else. Even in the worn-out corners, there were signs of life. Small pots of plants on windowsills, faint music playing from somewhere far, a child laughing down the street. It wasn't hopeless. It was just struggling. As they walked, he found himself thinking about his own younger days before success, before meetings and numbers and schedules swallowed him whole. He remembered the small home he grew up in, the nights when the electricity cut off, the way his mother lit candles and read to him by their flickering glow. He remembered how she always told him that even if the world didn't notice him yet, he had value. He had purpose. But over the years, he had forgotten that voice, forgotten those moments, forgotten who he used to be. Now, walking beside this girl with the same quiet strength he once had, those memories returned like gentle waves, After a few more turns, Lila stopped in front of a narrow building with peeling paint and rusted rails. The entrance door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. She looked up at him, almost as if warning him not to be surprised. "This is where I live," she said softly. He nodded. "Thank you for showing me," shifted her notebook from one hand to the other. "It's small," she added quickly, as if trying to manage his expectations. "Small doesn't matter," he said kindly. She gave a tiny smile, the kind that appears only when a child feels safe enough to be honest. She stepped inside the building, and he followed silently. The hallway smelled of old wood and damp air, but it wasn't dirty. Just aged a little tired, she led him up one flight of stairs. Each step creaked softly beneath their feet. A few neighbors peeked out of their doors curiously, not in a rude way, but simply because a tall, well-dressed stranger was following a child through their building. He nodded politely at them, and they nodded back in friendly confusion. At the end of the hall, Lila stopped in front of a door with faded blue paint. She turned to him, suddenly looking unsure. "Double quotes, sir, you don't have to come inside," she said. "It's okay. I know you're busy." He crouched a little so he was at her eye level, his voice gentle. "I'm not busy right now, and I'm here because I want to be. Only if you're comfortable, of course." She studied his face again, the same way she had in the car. Then she unlocked the door and stepped inside. He followed, closing it behind him quietly. The room was small, just one space serving his living room, kitchen, and sleeping area. The furniture was old, but clean. The curtains were thin, letting the streetlight cast gold shadows across the room. A small mattress lay in the corner with a neatly folded blanket on top. A single lamp flickered gently beside it, but what caught his attention most was the little table near the window with a pile of books, pencils, and scraps of paper filled with tiny handwriting. It was the corner of someone who worked hard, someone who cared deeply about learning. Lila placed her notebook carefully on the table, as if returning something to its rightful place. "This is where I study," she explained. "When the electricity works, I sit here. When it doesn't, I go outside." He looked around slowly. There was no clutter, no waste. Everything had a purpose. Everything was used and reused. He felt something twist in his chest. Sadness, admiration, all tangled together. "Where's your family?" he asked gently. She looked down at her toes for a moment before answering. "My mother works at night sometimes. My father isn't here anymore." She didn't explain further, and he didn't ask. Her voice didn't sound broken. It sounded like someone who had had to grow up too early. The billionaire walked toward the little study corner and touched the edge of one of her books. The pages were worn, and the cover had been taped back together several times. He turned to her with a soft expression. "You work very hard," he said. She shrugged a little. "I want to do well in school. I want to teach other kids one day." "Kids like me, why teaching?" he asked. She lifted her eyes slowly. "Because I like when people learn something new, and I don't want other kids to feel alone when they try." There it was. The answer that reached straight into his memory. His mother had once said the very same thing, that she became a teacher because she didn't want any child to feel forgotten or unseen. He swallowed hard, feeling the warm sting of emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "Lila," he said softly, "you have a good heart." She looked confused by the compliment. "I just want to help." "Sometimes," he said gently. "That's what makes a person truly important." Her eyes widened a little. Not expecting that answer, she sat on the floor near the mattress and hugged her knees. He lowered himself to sit across from her, mirroring her posture without thinking. The room felt still, like it was listening to their quiet conversation. After a moment, she asked, "Sir, can I ask another question?" "Of course." She hesitated, then said in a small voice, "Were you always someone like you are now?" The billionaire let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The question was innocent, but it carried weight. It asked not about his wealth, but about his journey. "No," he said honestly. "I wasn't." "Then, what were you like before?" He looked around her small home, then at her thoughtful face. A lot like you. He paused. Maybe not in every way, but I know what it feels like to wonder about the future, to feel small, to feel invisible. You felt invisible? She asked softly. He nodded. Many times, she rested her chin on her knees. So, how did you become important? He didn't answer right away. He looked out her window at the dim street below. The truth was not simple. It wasn't a perfect story. It wasn't a fairy tale. When I was younger, he said slowly, someone believed in me. Someone told me I mattered even when the world didn't see me yet. And I worked very hard. I didn't stop, even when it was difficult. Who believed in you? She asked. He felt his throat tighten again. My mother. Her eyes softened. She sounds like she loved you a lot. She did, he whispered. Lila hugged her arms around herself. I try to be strong like my mom, too. She works hard. She tells me that one day things will be better. He nodded gently. She's right. They sat in silence for a moment. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind of silence shared by two people who understood something deeper about each other. The lamp flickered again, and Leela reached over to tap it so the light steadied. He watched the small action with a tight feeling in his chest. Something so simple, keeping a light steady, had become part of her daily routine, part of her fight to keep her world bright. Leela, he said after a long pause, may I ask something? She nodded. Why don't you ask people for help more often? She shrugged. Because people don't like to be bothered, and sometimes asking feels like being a problem. I don't want to be a problem. His heart ached at her words. He leaned slightly closer. You're not a problem. You never were. Her eyes glistened just a little, catching the weak light from the lamp. Thank you, she whispered. He stayed in her home longer than he expected. He didn't check his watch. He didn't think about his schedule. He simply listened till he listened. She told him small things about her school, her friends, the challenges she faced. Nothing dramatic, nothing exaggerated, just the quiet truth of her daily life. And he realized something important. The world often overlooked children like her not because they were invisible, but because people stopped paying attention. She didn't want money. She didn't want pity. She didn't want miracles. She wanted to feel seen, and he had the power to do that, not just for her, but for many others. When it was finally time to leave, she walked him to the door. He knelt slightly again, so he was eye level with her. Lila, he said gently, you asked me earlier if someone like you can ever be important. She nodded quietly. He placed a hand over his heart. You already are. Her eyes widened. And for the first time that night, a true smile appeared, a small, warm smile that reached her eyes. Thank you, she whispered again. But this time her voice carried something new. Hope, belief, trust. As he stepped out of her home and walked down the hallway, he felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. It wasn't sadness exactly. It wasn't joy. It was something deeper, something he hadn't felt since he was a child. It was the feeling of remembering who he used to be, and as he walked out into the cool night air, he knew this wasn't the end. This little girl, with her notebook and her quiet courage, had just opened a part of him he thought was long gone. Her question wasn't just a question, it was a beginning. He sat quietly in his office long after the girl and her mother had left. The afternoon sun had faded, and the room slowly filled with the softer colors of evening. Yet his mind was alive, full of thoughts that refused to settle. The girl's words, her determination, and the small notebook she carried everywhere lingered in his mind like a gentle echo that would not fade. He had lived his life surrounded by wealth, meetings, decisions, and numbers. People praised him for building an empire, for being one of the most successful businessmen in the city. Yet none of those achievements had shaken him the way that girl's honesty had. She had spoken without fear, without pretending to impress him, and without expecting anything in return. And that truth had unsettled him more deeply than anything else. He stood up, took a slow breath, and walked toward the window. From the top floor, he could see the entire city, tall buildings glowing with lights. Busy streets filled with people hurrying home. Somewhere in all that noise and movement was the small neighborhood he had visited earlier. It was not far in distance, but it was worlds away from everything he had known for years. He realized that he couldn't just act like nothing happened. Something inside him had changed, and he could not ignore it anymore. The next morning, he didn't ask his assistant to prepare his car for the office. Instead, he told his driver they were returning to the same neighborhood. The driver hesitated, unsure if he heard correctly, but nodded and opened the door for him. During the ride, he looked out the window and saw things he never noticed before. Children walking to school with worn-out shoes. Street vendors trying to earn a little money for the day, and families waiting at small bus stops. Everything felt different now because he was seeing it with new eyes. When the car entered the narrow lanes of the girls' neighborhood, several people looked up in surprise. Luxury cars didn't normally stop there, but he wasn't thinking about what they thought of him. He was thinking about the girl, her mother, the empty containers near their stove, and the dim room she tried to study in. He stepped out of the car and walked slowly, taking his time to observe everything around him. Kids were playing with a torn football. 2 women were washing clothes using buckets of water. An old man sat outside a tiny shop reading a newspaper. Life here was simple, but also heavy, and he could feel that weight in the air. He reached the girl's home again. The door was open, and he saw her mother folding clothes near the bed. When she looked up and saw him, she gasped in confusion. She quickly stood up, unsure whether she should welcome him or apologize for something she didn't know about. The girl, sitting on the floor with her notebook, also froze when she saw him. He smiled gently and told them he hoped he wasn't interrupting. They shook their heads, still surprised. He asked if he could sit for a moment, and the mother brought a chair for him, apologizing for not having better furniture. He told her she didn't need to apologize for anything. He explained that he had been thinking a lot since yesterday. He told them honestly that the girl reminded him of someone he once loved deeply. It's someone who always believed that every child deserves a chance. The girl listened carefully, not fully understanding everything, but sensing that his words were sincere. Then he asked if he could see the rest of the house. Not out of curiosity, but because he wanted to understand what they truly needed. They hesitated at first, embarrassed that their home was so small and worn down, but eventually agreed. He walked through the rooms, noticing the cracked walls, the broken fan, the empty shelves, and the single dim bulb that barely lit the space. When he stepped outside again, he didn't speak for a moment. His eyes were calm, but his heart was racing with determination. He turned to the mother and told her that he wanted to help, not just for a day, not just with a small amount of money, but with something more meaningful. The mother didn't speak. She simply stared at him, her hands trembling slightly. The girl looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes, clutching her notebook closer to her chest. He told them he wanted to fix their electricity, so the girl could study without struggling. He wanted to make sure the kitchen had enough food. He wanted to ensure the mother had a stable job so she wouldn't have to worry every day. But most importantly, he wanted to support the girl's education from now on. He knew that if she was given a chance, she could reach far more than she'd ever imagined. The mother covered her mouth, tears gathering in her eyes. The girl blinked, unsure if she heard everything correctly. She looked at her mother, then back at him, and asked softly if he really meant all of it. He smiled and nodded. He told her that sometimes people need someone to believe in them before they can truly believe in themselves. For the first time in a long while, he felt a warmth inside him, a feeling he had forgotten. It wasn't pride, and it wasn't the satisfaction of finishing a business deal. It was something gentler, something that made him feel human again. He spent the rest of the day in the neighborhood, talking to different families, listening to their struggles, and learning about their hopes. He didn't come as a billionaire with power. He came as a person who wanted to understand. And the more he listened, the more he realized how many children were facing the same challenges as the girl. Some couldn't afford school supplies. Some skipped meals. Some worked small jobs just to help their families. It made him wonder how many dreams had been lost simply because no one stepped in to help at the right time. On the drive back to his office, he sat quietly again, but this time his silence was filled with purpose. He knew that helping one family was good, but not enough. There were too many others who needed support, not charity, but opportunity. Something began forming in his mind, an idea that grew stronger with each thought. He wanted to create something lasting, something that would continue even if he wasn't always there. When he reached his office, he immediately called his management team for an urgent meeting. They arrived quickly, expecting discussions about finance or business issues. Instead, they found him talking about children, education, and hunger. Some of them looked confused, others curious, but all of them noticed the difference in his tone. He wasn't reading numbers from a report. He was speaking from his heart. He told them he wanted to start a foundation, one that focused on helping children in under-resourced neighborhoods. He wanted to provide food, study materials, uniforms, scholarships, and even after-school programs. He spoke with so much energy that even his team, who had never heard him talk this way, felt inspired. One of his assistants asked him what caused this sudden change. He paused for a moment, then said quietly that someone reminded him of a lesson he had forgotten. They didn't ask more. They could see the sincerity in his eyes. Within hours, plans began forming. Teams were assigned, budgets were prepared, locations were selected. The entire office felt a new kind of energy, not one driven by profit, but by purpose. And though no one said it out loud, everyone knew that something important was happening. That evening, he visited the girl's family once more. This time, he brought an electrician, a carpenter, and a delivery truck filled with essential supplies. The girl watched everything with astonished eyes, as if she was watching her entire world shift around her. Her mother kept thanking him repeatedly, tears rolling down her cheeks. He told them not to thank him yet. He said the real change would come from the girl's hard work and dedication, not from what he was giving. He reminded her that her dream of becoming a teacher was still far away, but now she didn't have to walk there alone. She had support, and she had a chance, something many children never received. Later, as he stood outside their home, watching workers fix the wiring and organize the supplies, he felt a quiet peace settle over him. He knew he couldn't change the whole world overnight, but he could change one life at a time. And sometimes, that was enough to begin something bigger. On the drive home, he thought about all the times he had hurried past people, too busy to notice what they were going through. He wondered how many stories he had missed simply because he never stopped to listen. But now, things were different. The girl's question had opened a door inside him that he didn't want to close again. He looked out the window and whispered a promise to himself that he would not let this new purpose fade away. He would continue helping, continue learning, and continue listening. Because sometimes a single moment, a single question, or a single child could change a person's entire life, and he knew his life had already begun to change in ways he never imagined. The morning sun rose slowly over the city, spreading a soft golden glow across the buildings. He woke earlier than usual, not because of stress or business meetings, but because he felt something calm inside him, something warm that had settled into his heart over the past few weeks. Life had changed in ways he never expected, and every new day felt a little different from the one before. He stepped out of his car near the small neighborhood he had grown familiar with. The moment he walked in, several children playing in the street waved at him. Their smiles were bright, their eyes full of excitement. He waved back, feeling a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. As he walked toward the girl's home, he noticed the changes around him. The streets looked cleaner than before. The houses seemed lighter and more hopeful. It was as if the entire neighborhood had taken a deep breath and decided to believe in something better. When he reached the house, he saw the girl sitting outside with her notebook open, her legs folded under her and her head bent in deep concentration. She was writing something carefully, her small lips moving as she whispered every word she formed. Her mother was standing near the door, folding washed clothes with a peaceful smile. The girl looked up when she heard his footsteps. Her face lit up instantly, and she jumped to her feet, holding her notebook tightly. "You came," she said, full of excitement. He nodded and smiled. "Of course I came." She held the notebook out to him shyly. "I wanted to show you something," took the notebook gently and opened it. On the first page was a drawing, a picture of a classroom. There were children sitting at desks, smiling. At the front of the room stood a young teacher holding a book. Above the picture, the girl had written in careful handwriting, "One day, I will be the teacher." Felt something rise inside his chest. A mixture of pride and emotion that made it hard to speak for a moment. The drawing was simple, but it carried the weight of her entire dream. And now, that dream didn't feel impossible anymore. "This is beautiful," he said warmly. She grinned. "I studied a lot this week. I wanted to show you my marks too." She opened the next pages. There were math problems solved correctly, English sentences written neatly, and small paragraphs showing her improvement. She had worked hard, harder than most children her age would ever need to. He praised her, telling her how proud he was. Her mother stood nearby, her eyes shining with gratitude. She didn't say much. The way she looked at him spoke louder than any words. After spending some time with them, he asked if he could speak to the girl outside for a moment. She followed him to a small bench near a tree. The leaves above them rustled softly as a breeze passed by. "I want to tell you something," he said gently. She sat quietly, waiting. "Do you remember the question you asked me the first day we met?" She nodded slowly. "I asked if someone like me could ever be important." He took a breath. "That question changed my life." She looked surprised. She had never heard an adult say something like that, especially someone like him. He continued, "You made me remember the kind of person I wanted to be. You made me see things I ignored for too long. And because of you, I am helping more children now. We're building a center in this neighborhood where kids can study, get food, learn skills, and feel safe. It will open soon. And when it does, you'll be the first one to walk inside." Her eyes widened like stars. She looked like she didn't know whether to smile, cry, or run and tell the whole world. "And I want you to remember," he added softly, "you didn't get here because of me. You got here because you believed in your dream. You worked for it. You held on to it, even when life was hard." The girl suddenly wrapped her arms around him. He froze for a second, caught off guard, then gently placed a hand on her shoulder. It was a small gesture, but one that carried the weight of everything that had happened between them. Her voice was soft. "I won't forget what you did. Just promise me one thing." She pulled back and looked up at him. "When you grow up and become the teacher you want to be," he said, "help someone else the way you were helped." She nodded seriously, as if accepting a promise she intended to keep forever. As they sat there, the mother walked over with a cup of tea for him. She thanked him again, her voice shaky. She told him that their home felt different now, not just because of the repairs, but because they had hope again. She talked about how her daughter now woke up early, excited to study, and how she herself had begun doing small stitching jobs for the foundation's new office. He listened quietly, touched by every word. He had spent years making business decisions that affected thousands of people, yet he had never heard gratitude that felt so personal, so real. Later, he walked with the girl through the neighborhood. She showed him the spot where she used to sit and do homework when her house had no electricity. She showed him the small shop where she sometimes bought pencils when she had a little money. She even showed him the big mango tree where she and her friends played games. Every place carried a piece of her life, a story of her struggle and her strength. As they walked, other children joined them, curious and cheerful. They asked him questions, told him stories, and even tried to pull him into a game of tag. He laughed, truly laughed, something he had not done in a long time. When it was time for him to leave, the whole neighborhood seemed to gather around the car. People waved. Some thanked him. Some simply smiled with respect. But what mattered most was the girl standing at the front, her notebook pressed against her chest, her eyes filled with hope. He leaned down and told her he would come back soon. She nodded, with a smile that showed all her missing teeth, but somehow made her look even more charming as the car drove away and the neighborhood slowly disappeared from view. He looked out the window with a peaceful expression. For years he had believed that success was built by how many buildings he owned, how many deals he closed, how much wealth he had collected. But he finally understood something important, something that felt more real than any achievement he had chased before. Success wasn't about numbers. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about how high he could climb in the world. Success was when a small, hungry girl asked him a question that opened his heart and reminded him of his humanity. Success was seeing her smile. Success was watching her believe in herself. And success was knowing he had a chance to help create a better future for children who deserved far more than what life had given them. As the sun began to set, he whispered to himself the truth he had only just discovered. Sometimes the biggest changes in life come from the smallest voices. And that voice, the girl's voice, had transformed his life forever.